Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Friday, January 30th, 2026.
It is.
And if you're looking at your calendar, or maybe just feeling that, that subtle shift in the cultural atmosphere, you know exactly where we are standing. We are on the
And
precipice.
calm before the commemoration.
Exactly. We are about, 48 hours away from February 1st. And in the United States and Canada, that means the start of Black History Month.
Right.
But I want to be really clear right off the top here. We are not doing the standard, elementary school assembly version of this today.
No lists of peanut inventions or traffic light trivia.
We are shelving the biographies for a moment to look at the machinery of the month itself. Because this year, 2026, it isn't just another February. We are hitting a massive, flashing neon milestone. The official theme for 2026 is a century of Black history commemorations.
Which is a bit of a meta concept, isn't it? It's history looking in the mirror.
It is.
We're essentially commemorating the act of commemoration.
Right. It has been exactly 100 years since the very first Negro History Week launched back in 1926. But what I found so fascinating in the research packet is that while we're celebrating the centennial, the actual political climate right now in January 2026 it's incredibly hostile to the very idea of it.
It's a total paradox, a genuine paradox. You have this huge institutional milestone on one hand, 100 years of tradition, and then on the other, you have a federal government that is, arguably more antagonistic toward this specific history than we've seen in decades.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the origin story, and not the myths, but the actual strategic maneuvering by its founder, Carter G. Woodson.
And we need to talk about the origin of the friction, why this has always, from day one, been a political act.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive deep into the specific reports we have from CBS, the AP, and The Guardian about what is happening in Washington this week. I'm talking about the scrubbing of archives, the pausing of celebrations. It's happening in real time.
And we've got some incredible source material to work with. We have the original records from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, that's ASALH. We've got presidential proclamations going all the way back to Gerald Ford.
And we have the raw data, the reporting on the 2026 executive orders. So let's just jump in.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the context. Because to understand why 1926 even matters, we actually have to rewind another decade to 1915. And looking at our notes, the vibe in 1915 America wasn't just unfriendly to Black history. It was actively trying to erase it, wasn't it?
Erase might even be too soft a word. It was an active reconstruction of reality. You have to place yourself in September 1915. Carter G. Woodson travels to Chicago. Now, Woodson is a powerhouse intellect. He's the second Black American to get a PhD from Harvard.
Right after W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right after Du Bois. He is at the absolute peak of his field. But he steps into a world where the dominant cultural narrative is being defined by D.W. Griffith.
You're talking about The Birth of a Nation?
Exactly. That film premiered in early 1915, and we really, truly cannot overstate its impact. It wasn't just a movie. It was a technological marvel. It was a box office smash. It was a cultural phenomenon.
Just 3 hours long?
3 hours long. And its central thesis, its entire point, was that the Ku Klux Klan were the heroes who saved the South from the savagery of Reconstruction. It portrayed Black political agency as a complete and utter disaster for the nation.
And it was screened at the White House. That part is just staggering. President Woodrow Wilson, a historian himself, reportedly called it like history written with lightning.
History written with lightning. So this is the headwind Woodson is facing. This is the cultural tsunami. He's not just fighting ignorance or apathy. He is fighting a multi-million-dollar propaganda machine that is scientifically designed to dehumanize Black people. It was, for all intents and purposes, a weapon.
So when he goes to Chicago in September, He's looking for a counter-narrative. He's looking for an answer to this.
He is. He's there for the 50th anniversary celebration of emancipation.
So 50 years since the end of the Civil War.
Exactly. The state of Illinois sponsored this massive national exposition at the Chicago Coliseum to mark the occasion. And what Woodson sees there, it just changes his life. He sees thousands upon thousands of African Americans. The reports say 6,000 to 12,000 a day waiting in these huge overflow lines.
Just to see the exhibits.
Just to see exhibits on Black progress. To see evidence that they had done something in the last 50 years. Something other than what The Birth of a Nation was saying they had done. Woodson had this incredible insight. He realized there was this starving hunger in the community. The people knew the movie was a lie, but they didn't have the ammunition, the receipts to prove it.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's not about creating a history, it's about recovering one that was being buried. They had the feeling, but they needed the facts.
Precisely. They needed the data. Woodson realized that unless someone institutionalized the collection, the preservation, the study of this history, it would be completely washed away by the history written with lightning. So before he even leaves Chicago on September 9, 1915, he goes to the Wabash Avenue YMCA.
Which is still there, by the way. It's a historic landmark now.
It is a beautiful building, and he gathers a small group: Alexander L. Jackson, George Cleveland Hall, William B. Hartgrove, and James E. Stamps. A very small, determined group. And right there, they form the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, the ASNLH.
This is the Big Bang moment.
It is the Big Bang. This is what the whole Century of Commemorations theme is ultimately honoring. It's that decision in that room to stop complaining about the narrative and to start building a new one from the ground up.
And it wasn't just a social club. They started publishing almost immediately, right?
Yeah.
Because I think people forget that black scholars, I mean, they couldn't just submit a paper to the American Historical Review in 1916 and expect to get published.
Absolutely not. They were completely shut out of white academia. The doors were bolted. So Woodson, in 1916, launches the Journal of Negro History. And this is the machinery you mentioned in the intro. He creates a peer-reviewed, scholarly ecosystem where black historians can document the truth. He's building an intellectual fortress against the lies.
Okay, so the association is founded in 1915. The journal starts in 1916. But we don't get the actual Negro History Week until 1926. That's an 11-year gap. What was happening in between?
Infrastructure building. I mean, Woodson is just relentless. He's writing, he's speaking, he's fundraising with his own money half the time. He's trying to convince black colleges and public schools to take this seriously. He's building the foundation. But by 1926, he realizes that the deep scholarly work, the journal, it needs a public face. It needs a marketing vehicle to get this information out to the masses, not just the PhDs.
It needs to get into the hands of teachers and children.
Exactly. And this brings us to the timing. Every year, every single year, I hear the joke, of course they gave us the shortest month. It's like the standard cynical take on Black History Month.
Oh, absolutely. It's the first thing people say.
But looking at the sources, that cynicism is actually, it's completely misplaced.
It's a myth.
It is the most persistent, stubborn myth in American culture. It implies that some white government official sat in a room and said, all right, let's give them February. It's got fewer days. It's cold.
That sort of backhanded compliment.
Right. But that never happened. Carter G. Woodson chose February, and it was a purely strategic, deeply pragmatic choice.
Because of the birthdays.
Right. But we have to understand why those specific birthdays mattered so much. February 12th was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. February 14th was the day Frederick Douglass had chosen to celebrate his own birthday. Now, in the black community in the 1920s, these were effectively holy days.
I was reading about this. There were already parades, there were banquets, there were speeches in schools and churches. This was already an organic tradition.
It was a massive nationwide tradition. The Republican Party, used Lincoln's birthday to rally black voters. The black churches used Douglas's birthday to celebrate the spirit of abolition. Woodson looked at this entire landscape and he said, the attention is already there. The people are already gathering. I don't need to invent a new holiday. I need to hijack an existing one.
Hijack is a strong word, but it fits perfectly.
Yeah.
He wanted to change the content of the celebration, right? He wanted to swap out the substance.
Exactly. See, Woodson was actually very, very critical of how these days were being celebrated. He really hated the great man theory of history.
This idea that history is just the story of a few important individuals.
Yes. He thought focusing only on Lincoln and Douglas let everyone else off the hook. It ignored the millions of enslaved people who resisted, the soldiers who fought, the families who endured. He famously called the speakers at these birthday events ignorant spellbinders.
I love that insult. Ignorant spellbinders. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but he just meant they were full of hot air.
He felt they were just delivering platitudes. Lincoln freed us, Douglas spoke for us, now let's all go home and feel good. Woodson wanted to pivot from celebration to study. He wanted to use that week to inject actual curriculum, actual historical documents into the schools. He wanted to move the focus from two men to the entire race.
So the whole shortest month thing, he wasn't looking at the calendar for length. He was looking at the calendar for leverage.
Leverage is the perfect word. He was leveraging existing cultural momentum to smuggle in a radical educational agenda.
And the agenda really was radical. I want to read a quote from Woodson here, because it sets the stakes for why he thought this was so critical. He said, "If a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world."
And here's the key part.
and stands in danger of being exterminated.
Exterminated.
He didn't say forgotten. He didn't say ignored. He said exterminated.
He believed, and he wrote about this extensively, that physical genocide follows cultural genocide. If you can convince the world, and, crucially, convince a group of people themselves that they have contributed nothing to civilization, no art, no science, no philosophy, no governance, then removing them from the equation becomes a logical, ethically neutral act.
Wow.
Woodson saw history as a matter of life and death. It was the ultimate self-defense.
That context makes the evolution from 1926 to the present day feel so much more significant. This wasn't just a nice-to-have cultural celebration. This was, in his mind, an act of survival.
Absolutely.
So let's trace that evolution. We have the week, 1926. How do we get to the month in 1976? The outline calls this period the New Negro era, shifting into the Civil Rights era.
Well, it's a fascinating evolution of demand, really. In the 1920s and 30s, you have the New Negro movement in full swing. You have the Harlem Renaissance, of course, but you also have the Great Migration. Millions of black families are moving from the rural South to northern and western cities, and they're building new institutions, new schools, new churches, new social clubs.
And Woodson is ready to supply them with materials.
The association was like a one-stop shop, a publishing house. They were sending out pictures, pamphlets, lesson plans, even historical plays for children to perform in schools all over the country. The demand was enormous, and eventually the teachers and the community leaders started saying, a week isn't enough.
They're just running out of time to cover everything.
They had too much material. They were trying to cram centuries of history into 5 school days. So by the 1940s, you see places like West Virginia, where Woodson had deep personal and professional ties, celebrating Negro History Month unofficially. It was a completely grassroots expansion.
It wasn't a top-down declaration. It just started happening.
It just started bubbling up from the ground. The outline also mentions the House of Knowledge in Chicago.
Right, Frederick H. Hammurabi.
Yes. In the mid-1960s, he was a cultural activist in Chicago who just decided, we're doing a month. He called it Negro History Month. He started it at his cultural center. And this is so crucial to the story. The government didn't lead this. The people led it. The government eventually followed.
And the real tipping point seems to be the late 1960s. The outline points us specifically to 1969.
1969 is the pivot. You have to look at the campus climate of the time. The civil rights movement is evolving into the Black Power movement. The very term Negro is being debated and in many circles rejected in favor of Black. There's a new sense of pride, a new militancy. And at Kent State University, Black educators and students proposed the first official Black History Month celebration on a college campus.
Why Kent State?
Right.
We usually associate Kent State with the anti-war protests and the tragic shooting in 1970.
Well, it was a hotbed of all kinds of activism. And this is where the why of the month starts to change a little. Woodson wanted to prove Black humanity to a skeptical white world. But the students in 1969, they were more focused on radicalizing Black identity for themselves. They were demanding Black studies departments. They were demanding a curriculum that reflected their own reality and their own history, not just the sanitized version.
So it became more of an internal identity-building project.
It did, and that energy spreads like wildfire across college campuses. So by the time 1976 rolls around, which is, the American bicentennial, the month is effectively already happening in a lot of places.
Right. And 1976 is also the 50th anniversary of the first Negro History Week.
A perfect confluence of events. The ASLH, which had by then changed its name to the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, they officially say, okay, we are shifting our national focus from a week to a month.
And that's when the White House gets involved. President Gerald Ford issues the first message on the observance of Black History Month.
He does. And, for a politician in the mid-70s, it's actually a pretty direct statement.
I have Ford's quote here. He urged Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history.
Too often neglected. That is a presidential admission of a systemic failure in American education and culture. It was a real moment of alignment between the decades of grassroots work and the highest office in the land.
And then finally, in 1986, it becomes public law. Congress passes Public Law 99-244, officially designating February as National Black Afro-American History Month. It's written into the code.
But again, and I just cannot stress this enough, the law didn't create the observance. The law ratified it. The Century of Commemorations theme is so important because it reminds us that this was built brick by brick, by the people, often in defiance of the law, not because of it.
Which brings us crashing, and I mean crashing right into the present, January 2026. Because if 1976 was a moment of alignment, 2026 feels like a moment of collision.
It is a head-on collision. There's no other way to describe it.
Okay, let's get into the 2026 political landscape segment.
Yeah.
We are looking at reports from CBS News, the Associated Press, The Guardian. And the picture they paint of the current Trump administration's approach to the centennial is, well, it's not subtle.
No, not at all. What we're seeing, according to these reports, is a coordinated rollback. The sources indicate that the administration has effectively paused celebrations of Black History Month at several key federal agencies.
Okay, when we say paused, what does that technically mean? Does that mean they're just not buying the sheet cake for the office party?
It's much deeper than that. It's about ensuring compliance with a series of recent executive orders. The sources point specifically to an executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping, which has been interpreted across the government to ban any training, any celebration, any materials that suggest the United States is an inherently racist country, or that systemic racism is a current ongoing problem.
So if a Black History Month exhibit at, say, the Department of Housing and Urban Development discusses the history of redlining as a systemic issue that still affects wealth today,
That could be flagged as promoting divisive concepts or anti-American propaganda under the terms of the order. So what's happening is agency heads, afraid of running afoul of the White House, are freezing funds. They're canceling speakers. They are literally scrubbing their own websites.
the reports mention that terms like equity, diversity, and inclusion are being systematically removed from federal.gov websites.
They're being memory holed. And this isn't just bureaucratic shuffling. There is a specific high-profile target in the crosshairs: the museums, specifically the Smithsonian.
The National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Yes. There are reports of a new executive order being drafted that specifically targets the museum. The administration's argument, and we should state it clearly for the record, is that these institutions have been captured by what they call woke ideology and are actively rewriting history to make America look bad. They want a return to what they call patriotic education.
Patriotic education, which, when you think about it, sounds an awful lot like the great man history of Lincoln and Douglas that Woodson was fighting against in 1926.
It is almost exactly the same argument, just in 21st century language.
Yeah.
It's the argument that history's primary purpose is to instill national pride. Whereas Woodson, and pretty much every modern historian, would argue that history's primary purpose is to instill truth. And sometimes the truth isn't something to be proud of, it's just something you have to reckon with.
So how is ASIH, Woodson's organization, responding to this? I mean, this is their party. It's their centennial. And the guest of honor, the federal government, is essentially boycotting it.
They are responding with a very, very Woodson-esque defiance. Sylvia Cyrus, who's the executive director of ASIH, released a statement that essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "We started this in 1926 without a government proclamation. We don't need one now."
That is a power move. We didn't ask for your permission then, and we don't need your approval now.
Exactly. Their position is that Black history belongs to the people. It doesn't rely on a presidential signature for its validity. It is proclaimed, it is celebrated, it is uplifted by the community. If the White House wants to opt out, that's the White House's loss, not the history's loss.
There is also a quote in here from Kay Whitehead, who's the national president of the organization, that I think is really important for our listeners who might be thinking, well, okay, this is a shame, but I'm not Black, so this is kind of a niche issue for me.
Right. It's a critical point. Whitehead argues that Black history is actually most critical for white Americans to understand. She says that if you live in a white box, if your neighborhood, your school, your media, your social circle is entirely homogenous, then you are living in a delusion. You don't actually understand the country you inhabit.
You're missing the operating manual for the United States.
That's a perfect way to put it. You can't understand the economy, the electoral college, the layout of your own city, or the music on your radio without understanding Black history. It's not a separate story. It is the American story.
But the headwinds are severe. The Guardian report you mentioned, it details what it calls a campaign to scrub Black history that goes way beyond the federal government. We're talking about state legislatures, book bans, school board takeovers.
It's a pincer movement. You have the top-down squeeze from the federal government on funding and narratives, and then you have this bottom-up squeeze on local libraries and classrooms. We're seeing states pass laws that dictate exactly how teachers can talk about slavery and Jim Crow. We're seeing books like the 1619 Project, which we'll talk about later, being physically removed from school library shelves.
Which, ironically, just completely validates Woodson's original fear from 1915. If you control the archive, if you control the curriculum, you control the future.
And that is why this century of commemorations is so fraught, so tense. It's not a victory lap. It's defense of the citadel. The historians and the librarians and the teachers, they're all manning the walls right now.
This tension, it naturally leads to some very sharp critiques of the month itself.
Yeah?
Because even before this current political crackdown, there were plenty of people on the left and the right asking if a designated Black History Month is even the right vehicle for this anymore.
The critique of the container, is it a container or is it a catalyst?
Right. So let's talk about the tokenism critique first. The Guardian had a really sharp analysis of this. They called it the corporate feel that the month has taken on.
And we've all seen this, right? This is the phenomenon where a massive corporation puts a kente cloth pattern on their social media logo for 28 days. Maybe they host a lunch and learn about unconscious bias, send out an email celebrating a famous inventor.
And then they go right back to discriminatory hiring practices or investing in systems that harm Black communities on March 1st. It becomes a performance.
A fleeting performance, that's the term The Guardian used. The critique is that the month has been co-opted by capital. It's become a branding exercise rather than a time for real structural analysis. If you celebrate the first Black CEO of a company, but you ignore the terrible labor conditions of your predominantly Black warehouse workers, Woodson would say you are missing the entire point.
That connects directly to this other idea, this movement called Black History is Now.
Yes. This is a growing sentiment, especially among younger activists and scholars. The idea is that by relegating Black history to February or October in the UK and Europe, you create a psychological distance. You treat it like a museum exhibit. Look at what happened back then, which allows you to conveniently ignore what is happening right now.
It effectively quarantines the history. It puts it safely in the past.
Exactly. If you spend February posting inspirational quotes from Martin Luther King Jr., you might feel like you've done your part, and then you can ignore the voter suppression laws being passed in your state legislature in March. The Black History is Now argument is that we need to collapse that timeline. We need to see that the far-right rallies of 2026 are the direct lineage of the same forces that produced the birth of a nation in 1915. It's a continuum.
It's interesting because Woodson himself was actually wary of this exact kind of containment. He never wanted the week to be the only time people studied this history.
No, not at all. He saw it as a showcase. He wanted the week to be a demonstration of what students had been learning all year long. It was supposed to be a culmination, not the whole shebang.
He famously said he looked forward to the day when Negro History Week would be unnecessary.
He did. His ultimate goal was the full integration of Black history into the American curriculum so thoroughly that you couldn't possibly separate it out. We are clearly not there yet.
Not even close. In fact, you could argue we're moving further away from it given the current administration's patriotic education goals.
Right.
But let's look at the resistance. Because while Washington is freezing funds and scrubbing websites, local institutions, universities, libraries, community centers, they seem to be doubling down. We found some great examples in the research of how different places are interpreting this century of commemorations theme.
This is where the hope is, I think. The local response. Look at Regis University in Denver. We have notes on Dr. Wilcox there. She was asked in an interview if a month is sufficient, and she didn't mince words at all. She said, no, a month is not sufficient. It is woefully inadequate.
Direct. Honest.
Very. But she went further. She linked the history directly to what she called the constellation of social justice movements we see today. She's refusing to let the history be static. She's using it as a lens to look at the fragility of democracy in 2026. For her, it's a tool for the present, not a relic of the past.
And then you have UMass Amherst. I love this example because it breaks the regional stereotype.
Yeah.
We so often think of Black history as primarily a Southern story, slavery, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement in Alabama or Mississippi. But UMass is looking at its own backyard in Massachusetts.
This is so crucial. They are highlighting the history of the 54th and 55th Black regiments that fought in the Civil War. Now, if you've seen the movie Glory, you know the 54th. But UMass is digging into the specific local history of these men, where they came from in the state. They are also highlighting enslaved people like Lucy Terry Prince and the poet Phyllis Wheatley, who lived and worked in Massachusetts.
Which just busts the myth of the free North being innocent of or separate from the institution of slavery.
Exactly. It makes it local, visceral, and undeniable. And they are reminding people that W.E.B. Du Bois Woodson's great contemporary and rival was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. By grounding the history locally, they make it so much harder to dismiss or erase. It's harder to ban a book about your own town's history.
We also saw some really great practical work coming from librarians. There's a librarian named Kofi Akri at Cornell University's Africana Library.
Librarians are the unsung heroes of this whole fight. They're on the front lines. Akri is talking about the tactile experience of history for young people. He's using classic texts, books like Famous American Negroes by Langston Hughes, to teach children. But he's also showing them contemporary documentaries like More Than a Month, which is all about the debate we're having right now.
So he's teaching them the history, and he's also teaching them the history of the history.
He's giving them the context. He's trying to instill that armor that Woodson talked about. He's giving kids the psychological defense against the extermination of their identity.
Speaking of books, we have to equip our listeners. If the government is scrubbing websites and school boards are banning books, then physical books and reliable sources become the most important technology we have. We pulled a reading list from the Broome County Public Library and some other sources. If you want to honor this centennial properly, if you want to really dig in, what is on the reading list for 2026?
Well, you absolutely have to start with the source code. You have to read The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson himself.
Published in 1933.
And it reads like it was written this morning. It is chillingly relevant. There's a concept in that book where Woodson talks about the back door.
Oh, I have that quote right here. It's incredible. He wrote, "When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not need to send him to the proper door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit."
That is the chilling thesis of the entire book. He is arguing that the American education system at that time was designed to make Black people feel subconsciously inferior so that they would police themselves. They would accept their second-class status without needing a sheriff with a club to enforce it. Reading that book explains why the fight over curriculum is so vicious today. It's a fight for the mind.
It's the software of oppression.
It is. So that's number one. What else is on the list?
For a modern counter-narrative, you have to look at the 1619 Project, created by Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Which is ground zero for the political fight we just talked about.
It absolutely is, and that's precisely why you should read it. Don't just read the tweets about it or the cable news segments yelling about it. Read the actual book. Its whole project is to reframe the American narrative, to place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national story, rather than at the margins. It fundamentally challenges the 1776 founding narrative, which is why the current administration targets it by name. And for the labor aspect, since last year's theme, 2025, was African Americans and labor, what do you recommend for that?
For that, I'd say Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. Most people saw the movie, which was great, but the book is this dense, beautiful look at labor. It's about Black women as mathematicians, as scientists. It's the perfect example of the people making history. It's not about a charismatic orator. It's about the women doing the complex math that was necessary to put a human being on the moon.
It's Woodson's vision of history in action.
Exactly. And finally, for the migration story that brought Woodson to Chicago in the first place and reshaped the country,
It has to be The Warmth of Other Suns.
it has to be The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. It is the definitive magisterial epic of the Great Migration. It's not a dry academic text. It follows the intimate stories of three different people. It explains how the entire American demographic map was redrawn by millions of individual decisions to seek freedom.
So, okay, we have the origin story, we have the modern conflict, and we have the resources. As we start to wrap up this deep dive, how do we synthesize all of this? We're looking at a century of commemorations in a time that feels deeply, deeply precarious.
I think the synthesis is in understanding the resilience of the idea itself. I mean, think about it. Carter G. Woodson started this in 1915 with 4 other guys in a YMCA basement. He didn't have a grant from the federal government. He didn't have a White House proclamation. He had a conviction.
And that conviction was that the history existed, whether the mainstream acknowledged it or not.
Exactly. The government can scrub a website. A school board can ban a book. They can pause a celebration. But they cannot unhappen what happened. They cannot delete the 54th Regiment. They cannot delete the poetry of Phyllis Wheatley. They cannot delete the Great Migration. The facts persist.
So the month was never meant to be a container, it's a generator.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's a generator of curiosity. It's an annual prompt. Woodson said, "We are going back to that beautiful history, and it is going to inspire us to greater achievements." He viewed the past as fuel for the future, not as a monument to look at, but as an engine to power you forward.
And in 2026, if the federal government is stepping back, as it appears to be doing, the responsibility, the ownership, it just lands right back where it started.
With the people. With you, the listener. It returns to the Wabash YMCA model. It is up to communities, to libraries, to book clubs, to families, to individuals to decide that this matters and to do the work.
I want to leave everyone with a final provocation to mull over this weekend as February begins. We often talk about the verdict of history, like it's some divine judgment that comes down from the heavens. But it's not. The verdict of history is just a story written by the people who bothered to write it down, who bothered to preserve it.
And who bothered to read it and to teach it.
Exactly. So in 2026, amidst all this noise, all this friction, all this deliberate scrubbing of the record, what history are you writing? And maybe more importantly, what stories are you fighting to keep on the shelf for the next generation?
That is the question for the next century.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Please check the show notes for links to ASALH and that full reading list we discussed. Don't let the learning stop on the month ends.
Keep digging.
We'll see you next time.